She dug the grave with her bare hands. The frozen Kansas dirt tore her fingernails off one by one, but Clara Mercer kept digging. Her daughter's body was so small, burned beyond recognition, that it fit in a flour sack. She buried Emma next to William, next to Samuel, and walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back. 3 weeks later, she collapsed at the iron gates of Clearwater Ranch, Wyoming. She didn't beg for food. She demanded honest work. What Clara didn't know was that behind those gates, 4 motherless girls had already destroyed 7 women who tried to replace their mother. If you want to follow Clara's journey from rags to redemption, stay with me until the very end. Hit that subscribe button and comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The woman at the gates looked like death walking. Thomas Holloway saw her from his study window and knew that immediately. Not poetic death, not dramatic death, just the plain factual kind. The kind that came from walking too far on too little food, with too much grief weighing down every step. She moved like someone who had forgotten that bodies needed rest. Each stride mechanical determined the kind of movement that said she would keep going until her legs simply gave out beneath her. Her dress had been blue once, maybe brown. Hard to tell under 3 weeks of road dust and mud and hard living. Her boots, what remained of them, left bloody prints on the frozen ground. She carried nothing. No bag, no bundle, nothing but herself. And she was walking straight toward his front door. Thomas turned from the window and checked his pocket watch. 2:47 in the afternoon. Martha Pearson was in the kitchen. The girls were somewhere upstairs, probably plotting whatever new torment they had planned for whoever came next. 7 women in 2 years, 7 governesses, housekeepers, mother figures, whatever you wanted to call them. 7 women who had arrived full of hope and confidence, and 7 women who had left in tears and rage in the middle of the night without a word. The longest one lasted 3 months. The shortest lasted 4 hours. He should let Martha handle this one. That was the protocol. A meal if they asked politely, directions to town, nothing more. Clearwater Ranch was not a charity house, but something about this woman made Thomas walk downstairs himself. He opened the front door just as she reached the bottom of the porch steps. Up close, she looked worse. Her eyes brown, he noticed the color of good Kansas soil after rain were sunk deep into a face that had once been pretty and was now carved down to bone and shadow. Her hands gripping the edges of her shawl were raw and red, the knuckles split open and bleeding. She was thin in a way that spoke of weeks without proper food, but she stood straight. That was what stopped him cold. She did not cower. She did not bow her head or wring her hands, or offer the desperate smile of someone about to beg. She met his eyes directly, and her chin lifted. "Good afternoon." Her voice was rough, cracked from disuse, but steady as iron. "My name is Clara Mercer. I'm looking for honest work. Not food, not shelter, not charity. Work." Thomas studied her in silence. He was not a man who spoke when he had nothing to say. 17 years of building this ranch from nothing had taught him the value of watching, waiting, measuring a person before committing to words. "Mrs. Mercer," he said finally, "you look like you haven't eaten in a week." 12 days. She didn't flinch. "But I ain't asking for a meal, Mr. Holloway, Thomas Holloway." "Mr. Holloway." She inclined her head slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to be formal despite her appearance. "I'm asking for employment. I can cook, clean, mend, keep accounts, manage a household. I'm educated, sober, and willing to work harder than any man you've got. I ain't asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance to earn my keep. You're asking to work in my house looking like that?" It was a cruel thing to say. Thomas knew it as the words left his mouth, but he had learned that cruelty was sometimes the fastest way to truth. Clara Mercer did not look away. "I'm asking to work in your house despite looking like this," she said quietly. "Because looking like this ain't who I am. It's what happened to me, and what happens to a person ain't the same as who they are." Thomas felt something shift in his chest. It had been a long time since anyone surprised him. "Wait here," he said. He closed the door in her face. Clara stood on that porch for 6 minutes. She knew because she counted the seconds. An old habit from the years when time was the only thing she had plenty of. 6 minutes of standing in the cold, watching her breath fog in the air, wondering if she had just made another terrible mistake. 19 doors. That was the count now. 19 ranches, farms, and homesteads between Kansas and here. 19 times she had knocked, asked for honest work, and been turned away. "We don't take in strays." "Try the workhouse in Laramie." "You look like trouble, ma'am." "My wife don't want your kind near our children." Your kind. As if poverty were a disease. As if grief were catching. Clara's jaw tightened. She was 29 years old. She had been a wife for 6 years, a mother for 4. She had kept a home, managed accounts, nursed her husband through 2 winters of influenza before the fire took him along with everything else. She had buried her son with trembling hands. She had buried her daughter with none. Emma's body had been so small after the fire. So light. Clara had carried her to the grave in a flour sack because there was nothing else left. She was not your kind. She was a woman who had survived things that would have killed most men. And she would keep surviving even if it killed her too. The door opened. Thomas Holloway stood there with a tin plate in one hand and a mug in the other. Steam rose from both. "Sit." He nodded toward a wooden chair near the railing. "Eat, then we'll talk." Clara hesitated. Pride warring with need. Common sense won. She sat. She took the plate stew thick with potatoes and carrots and chunks of beef that made her mouth water instantly, and the mug coffee hot and strong and bitter in the best way. She ate slowly. She had learned the hard way that a starving stomach couldn't handle food too fast. Each bite was deliberate, careful. Thomas Holloway leaned against the porch railing and watched her without speaking. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had done real work despite the obvious wealth of his surroundings. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples. His face had the weathered quality of a man who spent more time outdoors than in parlors. He might have been 35 or 45. Hard to tell with men like this. Men who carried their age in their eyes rather than their faces. And his eyes were old and cold and guarded in a way Clara recognized because she saw the same thing every time she looked in a mirror. This was a man who had lost something important. She finished the stew and set the plate aside. "Thank you," she said. That was generous. That was practical. A woman who faints from hunger on my property is a problem I don't need. I don't faint. Everyone faints eventually, Mrs. Mercer. Body's got limits. So I've been told. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth seep into her cracked knuckles. But I've found that limits are more flexible than people believe. Thomas studied her again with that unreadable expression. "Where are you from?" "Tennessee originally, then Kansas, now here." "That's a lot of moving." "My husband was a man who chased opportunities." It wasn't quite a lie. Samuel had always been chasing something, the next investment, the next sure thing. When he died, she found herself without a home, without family, without anywhere to turn. When he passed, I found myself with nothing. No family. None living. No children. Clara's hands tightened on the mug. This question. This was the one that cut deepest. "I had 2. Her voice came out flat, practice stripped of the raw grief that still lived in her chest. "William died of diphtheria when he was 4. Emma..." She paused, swallowed. "Emma died in the same fire that took my husband. 18 months ago. She was 2 years old." The words fell into silence. Thomas Holloway's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold blue-gray eyes. Something that might have been recognition. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the first thing he'd said that sounded genuine. "Thank you." Clara drew a breath. "Now, about the work." "I don't need a housekeeper. I've got Martha Pearson." "I ain't asking to be a housekeeper. I'm asking to be useful in whatever way you need. And if I don't need anything, then I'll thank you for the meal and be on my way." She said it calmly, but they both knew it was a bluff. On her way to where, to what? There was nothing out there except more roads, More rejections, more slow starvation until her body gave out. Thomas Holloway pushed off from the railing and stood directly in front of her. I have 4 daughters. Clara went still. Margaret is 12, Sarah is 9, Elizabeth is 6, Ruth is 4. His jaw tightened. Their mother left 2 years ago, ran off with a lawyer from San Francisco, hasn't been seen since. Clara said nothing. She waited. The girls have not been the same since. They've made it their mission to drive away every woman who comes near them. 7 governesses in 2 years, Mrs. Mercer. The longest one lasted 3 months. The shortest lasted 4 hours. 4 hours? Sarah put a snake in her bed, a rattlesnake. Woman nearly died of fright before she even saw it wasn't venomous. Clara blinked. A 9-year-old caught a rattlesnake. Sarah can catch anything that moves. She's got a gift. Thomas's voice was flat, but Clara caught something underneath pride maybe, or exhaustion, or both. She also has a temper that could strip paint off a barn door. And the others. Margaret doesn't speak to anyone she doesn't have to. She runs this household more than Martha does. Keeps the younger ones in line, makes sure they eat and sleep and do their lessons. She's 12 going on 40. Elizabeth. Lizzie's scared of her own shadow, has nightmares most nights, collects things, buttons, feathers, rocks like she's trying to hold on to something that won't disappear. And Ruth. Thomas's expression shifted, just slightly. Ruth doesn't remember her mother. She was 2 when Victoria left. She asks questions sometimes. What does a mother do? Why did she go away? Is she coming back? He shook his head. I don't know how to answer her. I don't know how to answer any of them. Clara looked at this man, this wealthy rancher with his stone house and his 1,000 acres and his 4 broken daughters, and understood something she hadn't expected. He wasn't offering her a job. He was asking for help. I've hired 7 women in 2 years, Thomas continued. Teachers, governesses, housekeepers, whatever you want to call them. Every single one has either quit, fled, or been carried out in hysterics. My daughters are not easy children, Mrs. Mercer. They are hurt and angry, and they trust no one. I ain't asking them to trust me. Thomas stopped. What? Trust ain't something you ask for. It's something you earn. Clara set down the coffee mug and rose to her feet. I ain't here to be their mother. I ain't here to replace anyone. I'm here because I need work and you need help. That's all. That's all. That's enough to start with. Thomas studied her for a long moment. I'll give you 30 days, he said finally. Food, shelter, a room in the servants' quarters, no wages, not yet. A trial. A trial. Prove you can handle my daughters without running away or breaking down, and we'll discuss permanent employment. And if I fail, then you leave with a reference letter that might help you find work somewhere else. His eyes hardened. But Mrs. Mercer, if you hurt my children, if you lie to me, if you steal from this house or bring trouble to my door, I won't be merciful. Clara met his gaze without flinching. I understand perfectly, Mr. Holloway. You're offering me a chance, not a guarantee. You're trusting me with your children, which is the most valuable thing you have, and you're warning me that trust once broken can't be fixed. She held his stare. I accept your terms. All of them. For a long moment they stood there, 2 wounded people, measuring each other across a gulf of suspicion and desperate hope. Then Thomas nodded once. Martha will show you to your room. Supper's at 6. You'll meet the girls then. He turned toward the door, then paused. Mrs. Mercer. Yes. The last governess left at 3 in the morning. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. Just vanished like smoke. His voice was flat, but there was something underneath pain maybe, or exhaustion. She told Martha my daughters were demons in pinafores, and no amount of money was worth the torment. Clara almost smiled. Mr. Holloway, she said quietly, I've walked 3 weeks with no food and no hope. I've buried everyone I ever loved. I've been called beggar burden, and worse things I won't repeat. She lifted her chin. Whatever your daughters throw at me, I promise you I've survived worse. Something in Thomas Holloway's expression shifted. He almost looked like he believed her. The room was small, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a bed with clean sheets, a washstand with actual soap, and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. To Clara, who had spent the last 3 weeks sleeping in barns' ditches, and one memorable night curled inside an abandoned chicken coop, it looked like heaven. Martha Pearson had shown her upstairs with minimal conversation and maximum suspicion. The housekeeper was a stout woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair, sharp eyes, and a mouth that looked like it hadn't smiled since the Lincoln administration. "Mr. Holloway told me to give you these." She'd handed Clara a bundle, a plain gray dress, clean undergarments, a pair of boots that actually fit. "Supper's at 6. Don't be late. The girls eat in the main dining room with their father." "Thank you, Mrs. Pearson." The older woman had paused at the door. The last girl who came here thought she could charm her way into the family. Thought if she was pretty enough, sweet enough, Mr. Holloway would marry her, and she'd be mistress of all this. Martha gestured vaguely at the walls, the house, the vast property beyond. She learned different. "I ain't got no interest in marrying anyone, Mrs. Pearson. I'm here to work." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "We'll see." Now alone in her tiny room, Clara stripped off her ruined clothes and used the wash basin to scrub 3 weeks of road dust from her skin. The water turned gray, then brown, then gray again. She studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Thin. Too thin. Her collarbones jutted out like knife blades. Her cheeks had hollowed in a way that made her eyes look too large for her face. Her hair hung in lank brown strands that needed washing and probably cutting. She looked old. She was 29, but she looked 40. No matter. Looks weren't what she had to offer. She dressed in the clean clothes Martha had provided and spent the remaining time before supper sitting by the window, watching the sun sink toward the western hills. Clearwater Ranch spread out before her like a painting she couldn't afford. Rolling pastures dotted with cattle. Fences stretching to the horizon. Barns and outbuildings clustered around the main house. Men on horseback moving in the distance, doing the endless work of keeping a place like this alive. It was beautiful. And somewhere inside that beautiful house, 4 little girls were sharpening their knives. Clara had faced hunger. She had faced grief. She had faced the particular cruelty of people who saw poverty as a character flaw. But she had never faced 4 children who had made destroying hope into an art form. She straightened her shoulders. She had promised Thomas Holloway that she had survived worse. Time to find out if that was true. The dining room was designed to intimidate. A long mahogany table that could seat 20. Crystal chandeliers catching the lamplight. A fireplace large enough to roast a pig. And above the mantel a portrait of a woman so beautiful that Clara stopped in the doorway just to stare. Dark hair, green eyes. A smile that wasn't quite kind, but was certainly triumphant. This had to be the mother, the one who left. "That's our mother." Clara turned. A girl stood in the opposite doorway, 12 years old, according to her father, though she held herself like a woman of 30. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's cold eyes, and she was looking at Clara with an expression of pure, undisguised hatred. "You must be Margaret." "Maggie." The correction was sharp. "Only my mother called me Margaret." "Maggie, then. I'm Mrs. Mercer." "I know who you are." The girl didn't move. "You're the new one. Father said you'd be eating with us." "That's right. The last one ate with us, too." Maggie's lips curved, not quite a smile. "For a while. Then Sarah put a snake in her bed and she ran screaming into the night in her nightgown." "I heard. That must have been quite a snake." "Sarah's good at catching things." "So your father said." Maggie's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. "She's good at catching other things too. Spiders, scorpions. Once she caught a skunk and let it loose in the schoolroom." "That must have been memorable." "The smell lasted for 3 weeks." "I imagine it did." Silence stretched between them. Maggie was testing her. Clara could see it in the girl's eyes, the careful calculation, the predator's patience. She was looking for weakness, for fear, for any crack she could exploit. Clara had seen that look before. In the eyes of creditors, in the faces of the townspeople who had called her your kind and turned her away from their doors. She wasn't afraid of a 12-year-old. "Where are your sisters?" Clara asked calmly. "Sarah's hiding under the table. Lizzie's behind the curtain. Ruth is—" Maggie paused. "Actually, I don't know where Ruth is. She wanders off sometimes." Clara glanced at the table, then at the heavy velvet curtains by the window. She didn't acknowledge either hiding spot. "Should we look for Ruth before supper?" Something flickered in Maggie's expression. Surprise, maybe. "She'll turn up. She always does." "All right." Clara walked slowly into the room, her movements unhurried. She chose a seat, 3 chairs down from the head of the table, not presumptuous, but not timid either, and settled into it. "You can come out now," she said conversationally. "Both of you. I ain't going to bite." Silence. Then a small voice from under the table. "How'd you know I was here?" "Your sister told me." "Maggie." The outrage in that voice was pure 9-year-old fury. "You were breathing too loud," Maggie said flatly. "Not my fault." A girl emerged from under the table, red-brown hair, gray eyes, face full of freckles and fury. Sarah Clara assumed. The snake catcher. "You're supposed to be scared," Sarah announced, planting her hands on her hips. "Everyone's scared when they first meet us. I ain't everyone." "That's what they all say." "Do they?" Clara tilted her head. "What else do they say?" The question seemed to throw Sarah off balance. She frowned, her brow furrowing. "They say they want to be our friend. They say they're here to help. They say—" Her voice turned bitter. "They say they won't leave us, that we can trust them. And then they leave. Every single one." Clara nodded slowly. "That must hurt something fierce." Sarah's mouth opened, closed. For just a moment, the armor cracked, and Clara saw something raw underneath. Not anger, but pain. Deep, old pain that no 9-year-old should have to carry. Then the armor slammed back down. "I don't care," Sarah spat. "I don't care if they leave. They're all stupid anyway. Stupid and weak and— I ain't going to tell you I want to be your friend." Sarah stopped mid-sentence. "What?" "I ain't going to tell you I want to be your friend," Clara repeated calmly, "because we don't know each other yet, and friendship has to be earned, not promised." Behind the curtain, something rustled. The fabric twitched. "I ain't going to tell you that you can trust me," Clara continued, "because trust has to be proven, not declared. And I sure as sunrise ain't going to tell you I'll never leave, because that's a promise no honest person can make." Maggie had gone very still in the doorway. Sarah was staring at Clara like she'd grown a second head. "What I will tell you is this." Clara leaned forward slightly, meeting Sarah's eyes. "I'm not here to replace your mother. I'm not here to win your love or make you forget your pain. I'm here because I need work, and your father offered me a trial. That's all." "That's all?" Sarah's voice cracked. "That's all. Whatever else happens, friendship, trust, respect, that'll have to be built over time. By what I do not, what I say." The curtain moved again. A small face appeared at the edge, round cheeks, tangled blonde hair, brown eyes too big for such a little face. Elizabeth, Lizzie. "You talk different," Lizzie whispered. "From the others." "I reckon I do." "Why?" "Because I ain't the others." Clara looked at each of them in turn. Maggie rigid in the doorway, Sarah bristling with confused anger, Lizzie half hidden behind velvet. "I'm just a woman who needs a job and ain't got anywhere else to go. I ain't trying to be anything more than that." Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Thomas Holloway appeared behind Maggie, and his eyes swept the room, taking in the tableau, the positions, the tension hanging in the air like smoke. "I see you've met," he said neutrally. "We were just getting acquainted," Clara replied. Thomas's gaze moved to Maggie, to Sarah, to Lizzie still clutching the curtain. "Where's Ruth?" "Here, Papa." They all turned. A tiny girl stood in the doorway behind Thomas, 4 years old. Blonde curls, blue eyes exactly like her father's. She was clutching a worn teddy bear that had clearly seen better years, and she was looking at Clara with open, unguarded curiosity. "Are you the new lady?" "I am. My name's Mrs. Mercer." "I'm Ruth." The little girl walked past her father, past her sisters, and stopped directly in front of Clara's chair. "Do you know how to braid hair?" Clara blinked at the question. "I do. Mama used to braid my hair before she went away." Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact, without the pain that shadowed her sister's words. "No one braids it right anymore. Maggie tries, but she pulls too hard." "I do not," Maggie muttered. "You do. It hurts." Clara looked at this small, serious child, the one who didn't remember her mother, the one who asked questions no one could answer, and felt something shift in her chest. "I could braid your hair tomorrow," she said quietly. "If you'd like." Ruth considered this for a moment. Then she nodded decisively. "Okay." She turned and walked to her seat at the table, climbing up onto the chair with the teddy bear still clutched under one arm. Sarah made a sound of disgust. "Ruth, you can't just—" "Why not?" "Because we don't—" Sarah stopped, glanced at Maggie. Some silent communication passed between them. Never mind. Thomas Holloway took his seat at the head of the table, and the rest of the family followed Maggie on his right. Sarah beside her, Lizzie slipping into place next to Ruth, and Clara 3 seats down exactly where she'd chosen. No one spoke as Martha Pearson brought in the food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread. No one spoke as plates were filled and forks were lifted. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching and listening. What she saw was troubling. Thomas Holloway was not a cruel man. He didn't snap at his daughters or ignore them or treat them with coldness. But neither did he connect with them. He looked at them across the dinner table the way a man might look at a puzzle he couldn't solve, with concern. Yes, but also with helpless distance. He didn't know how to reach them. Maybe he had never known. Or maybe he had known once before Victoria left and had forgotten in the wreckage that followed. Maggie kept her eyes on her plate, answering her father's questions in single words. Sarah radiated hostility like heat from a stove glaring at Clara whenever she thought no one was looking. Lizzie ate in tiny bites, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting around the room as if watching for danger. Only Ruth seemed unaffected. She chattered about her day, about a bird she'd seen, about a bug Lizzie had found, about the way the clouds looked like horses if you squinted just right. No one else spoke. When the meal was over and Martha came to clear the plates, Thomas rose from his chair. "Mrs. Mercer, a word in my study." Clara followed him out of the dining room and down a long hallway to a door at the far end. The study was exactly what she'd expected: massive desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, hunting trophies on the walls. Thomas closed the door behind them and gestured to a leather chair. Clara sat. He didn't. "How did you do it?" he asked. "Sir, the girls. They didn't scream at you, didn't throw anything, didn't try to drive you from the room." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "That's the first time in 2 years that a new arrival has made it through supper without an incident." "I didn't try to make them like me." "Explain." "Every other woman who came here, the governesses, the teachers, whatever they were, they wanted your daughters to accept them. Wanted to be welcomed. Wanted to matter." Clara shook her head. "Children who've been abandoned can smell that desperation a mile off. It reminds them of their own wanting, their own need. Makes them feel unsafe." Thomas was watching her with an intensity that might have been unnerving if Clara hadn't already survived far worse. "So what did you do instead?" "I told them the truth. Told them I was here because I needed work, not because I wanted to replace their mother. Told them trust had to be earned, not promised." She paused. "And I told them about my children." Something shifted in Thomas's expression. "Your children who died?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because they needed to know I understand what it feels like to lose someone. That I ain't going to pretend their pain don't exist. or try to fix it with pretty words and false smiles. Clara's voice was quiet, but steady. Those girls ain't monsters, Mr. Holloway. They're children who've been hurt bad by someone who was supposed to love them. They're testing every person who comes near them, waiting for the next betrayal. The only way to pass that test is to refuse to play the game. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk, sat down heavily, and ran a hand through his graying hair. He looked, Clara realized, exhausted. Not just tired, bone-deep weary, like a man who'd been fighting a war he couldn't win for far too long. "She didn't leave because of the girls," he said finally. His voice was rough. "Victoria, everyone thinks, everyone assumes—" He stopped, shook his head. "It wasn't about Maggie or Sarah or Lizzie or Ruth. It was about me." Clara waited. "I wasn't a good husband. I worked too much. Gone too often. Didn't give her the attention she needed." His jaw tightened. "When she found it somewhere else, I can't say I was surprised. Hurt, yes. Angry. But not surprised." "And the girls?" "The girls blamed themselves. Maggie heard us arguing the night before Victoria left. Heard her say—" He stopped, swallowed. "Heard her say the children were chains holding her down." Clara felt something twist in her chest. "Maggie hasn't forgiven her. Don't think she ever will. Sarah's angry at everyone and everything because it's easier than being sad. Lizzie's scared the rest of us will disappear too. And Ruth," his voice cracked. "Ruth was too young to understand. She just knows her mother was here one day and gone the next, and nobody can explain why." Clara thought of Emma. Of the last time she'd held her daughter. Of the fire that had taken everything. Of the tiny flour sack grave she'd dug with her bare hands. Why? She'd asked that question 1,000 times. Why Emma? Why then? Why couldn't love be enough to keep someone alive? There was no answer. There never was. "Mr. Holloway," she said quietly, "I can't fix what your wife broke. Nobody can. But I can promise you this: I won't lie to your daughters. I won't make promises I can't keep. And I won't abandon them without warning, no matter what they throw at me. Even if they make your life hell, even then." Why? The question was sharp, almost aggressive. "What do you have to gain? This trial offers nothing certain. No wages, no security. Why would you endure what my daughters will put you through for a chance that might lead nowhere?" Clara met his eyes. "Because I've got nothing left to lose, Mr. Holloway. Everything I loved is gone. Everything I built has burned to ashes. What your daughters can do to me, what anyone can do to me, can't possibly hurt worse than what I've already survived." She rose from her chair. "I ain't staying because I hope to win something. I'm staying because I've finally found a place where I can stop running. Whether that place becomes a home or just another way station." She shrugged. "That depends on more than just me." Thomas Holloway stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. 30 days, Mrs. Mercer. We'll see what you're made of." "Yes, sir, we will." She turned and walked out of the study, closing the door quietly behind her. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet around her. Wind rattled the windows. Somewhere overhead, footsteps creaked. Thomas pacing in his study maybe, or one of the girls unable to sleep. She was warm. She was fed. She was clean. And yet sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept returning to the dining room, to Maggie's hatred, to Sarah's fury, to Lizzie's fear, to Ruth's innocent question about braiding hair, 4 broken girls, 1 broken man, and Clara, who was broken too. But broken things could be mended, not made new, not returned to what they were before, but patched and reinforced and made useful again. Maybe that was why she was here. Not because she deserved to be saved, but because she understood what it meant to need saving. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Maggie would test her. Sarah would attack her. Lizzie would watch her. Ruth would ask questions that had no answers. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, just for this one quiet night, Clara Mercer was exactly where she needed to be. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 18 months, she slept without dreaming of fire. The first week was war. Not the loud kind, not screaming or throwing things or dramatic confrontations. This was the quiet kind. The kind fought with silences and stares and small cruelties designed to wear a person down one cut at a time. Clara had expected it. She had prepared for it. But knowing a battle was coming and actually fighting it were two very different things. Maggie was the general. She didn't attack directly. She was too smart for that. Instead, she orchestrated a whispered word to Sarah, a meaningful look at Lizzie, a casual comment that landed like a slap. Mrs. Mercer's dress has a stain on the back. Mrs. Mercer's hair looks like a bird's nest. Mrs. Mercer probably can't even read. Look at how she holds the book. Clara heard every word. She was meant to. That was the point. She didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't give Maggie the satisfaction of knowing the barbs had landed. Instead, she rose every morning before dawn. She helped Martha in the kitchen without being asked. She laid out the girls' breakfast, pressed their clothes, made sure the schoolroom was ready before they arrived. She showed up. Every single day. Exactly the same. Sarah was the soldier. Where Maggie used words, Sarah used action. She accidentally spilled ink on Clara's only spare dress. She tracked mud through the hall Clara had just finished sweeping. She let the chickens loose in the kitchen and blamed it on a faulty latch. On the fourth day, Clara found a dead mouse in her bed. She picked it up by the tail, carried it to the kitchen, and dropped it in the waste bucket without a word. That night at supper, Sarah watched her with narrowed eyes. "You ain't scared of mice. I've seen worse." "Like what?" Clara looked at the girl 9 years old, fierce as a wildcat, desperate for someone to fight back so she could feel justified in her hatred. "I buried my daughter in a flour sack," Clara said quietly. "After that, a mouse don't seem like much." Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Her face went white. For a moment, just a moment, the armor cracked. Clara saw the little girl underneath the one who was terrified of being hurt again, who attacked first because waiting to be wounded was unbearable. Then Sarah shoved back from the table and ran from the room. No one spoke. Thomas half rose from his chair, then stopped. He looked at Clara, uncertainty written across his face. "Should I let her go?" Clara's voice was gentle. "She needs time." "Time for what?" "To figure out I ain't going anywhere." Maggie was watching Clara with an expression she couldn't read. Lizzie had gone very still, her eyes huge in her small face. Ruth continued eating her potatoes, apparently unbothered by the drama. "Mrs. Mercer." Clara turned to the smallest girl. "Yes, Ruth. You said you buried your daughter in a flour sack. Was it a big flour sack or a little one?" The question hit Clara like a fist to the chest. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The dining room blurred. She was back in Kansas, kneeling in the frozen dirt, holding what remained of Emma in her arms. So small. She had been so small. "A little one," Clara heard herself say. "She was only 2. Ruth nodded seriously. "That's very sad." "Yes, it was." "Do you miss her?" "Every day." "I don't remember my mama." Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact. "Maggie says I should be glad, but I don't think that's right. I think I should be sad that I don't remember. Is that wrong?" Clara looked at this tiny philosopher with her blonde curls and her worn teddy bear and felt something crack open in her chest. "That ain't wrong at all, sweetheart. Missing someone you never knew, that's its own kind of sad. Don't let anyone tell you different." Ruth considered this. Then she smiled a small, genuine smile that transformed her whole face. "I like you, Mrs. Mercer. You tell the truth." From across the table, Maggie made a sound of disgust, but she didn't say anything. She just gathered her plate and left the room in silence. Lizzie followed a moment later, scurrying after her oldest sister like a shadow. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mercer, I apologize for—" "No need." Clara rose from her seat. They're testing me. That's what they're supposed to do. And if you fail their tests... Clara looked at him, this broken man trying so hard to hold his family together. I don't intend to fail, Mr. Holloway. She excused herself and went to find Sarah. The girl was in the barn, curled up in an empty stall with her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't look up when Clara approached, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Clara sat down in the hay a few feet away. She didn't speak, didn't try to comfort or explain. She just sat there present and patient, waiting for whatever came next. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, Sarah's voice broke the silence. Why'd you say that? Say what? About your daughter. About the flour sack. Sarah's voice cracked. You shouldn't have said that. Why not? Because... The girl's hands clenched into fists. Because now I feel bad for putting that mouse in your bed. And I don't want to feel bad. I want to hate you. I know. You're supposed to be like the others, supposed to get scared and run away. That's what happens. That's what always happens. Maybe I ain't like the others. Everyone says that. Sarah finally looked up and her eyes were red-rimmed. They all say that. And then they leave anyway. Clara met her gaze steadily. You're right. They probably did say that. And they probably did leave. So why should I believe you? You shouldn't. Not yet. Clara drew her knees up, mirroring Sarah's position. Believing takes time. Takes proof. I could tell you 100 times that I ain't going anywhere, but that wouldn't mean nothing. Words are easy. Staying is hard. Sarah was watching her with an intensity that seemed too old for her 9 years. So what? You're just gonna stay no matter what we do. That's the plan. What if Maggie makes things really bad? She knows how to make things really bad. I expect she does. What if Sarah... She caught herself flushing. What if I put something worse than a mouse in your bed? Clara almost smiled. Then I'll deal with whatever it is and be there for breakfast the next morning. That's stupid. Maybe. You'll get tired. Everyone gets tired eventually. Maybe. Clara's voice softened. But I'm pretty stubborn, Sarah. It's one of my few virtues. The girl was quiet for a long moment. The barn creaked around them. Somewhere outside, a horse whickered. My mama wasn't stubborn, Sarah said finally. She got tired of us. That's what Maggie says. She got tired of being a mother and she left. That's what Maggie says. What do you say? Sarah's lower lip trembled. I say she didn't love us enough. If she loved us enough, she would have stayed, no matter what. Clara thought about those words spoken by a 9-year-old who was trying so hard to be tough, to be angry, to be anything other than devastated. Can I tell you something, Sarah? The girl didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. When my husband and daughter died, I wanted to die too. I thought about it every single day. What was the point of living? What was I surviving for? Clara took a breath. But I kept going anyway, not because I wanted to, because I was too stubborn to quit. Sarah was listening now, really listening. Some people ain't built that way. Some people feel the pain, and it's too much. They run because staying would kill them. It ain't about love, not really. It's about what a person can bear. So you're saying Mama left because she couldn't bear us? I'm saying she left because she couldn't bear something. Maybe it was the ranch. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was something inside herself that had nothing to do with you at all. Clara held Sarah's gaze. But here's what I know for certain. A person leaving says everything about them and nothing about you. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. That don't make sense. I know it don't. Loss never makes sense. Then how do you... Sarah's voice broke. How do you stop hurting? Clara's heart cracked clean in two. She opened her arms. For a moment, Sarah just stared at her pride and pain warring on her face. Then she launched herself forward and buried her face in Clara's shoulder, sobbing like the world was ending. Clara held her tight. She didn't say anything, didn't offer false comfort or empty promises. She just held this fierce, wounded girl and let her cry. That was the thing about children Clara had learned. They didn't need you to fix their pain. They just needed to know they weren't carrying it alone. The second week brought change. Not dramatic change, not overnight transformation or sudden warmth. But something had shifted after that night in the barn. Sarah still glared at Clara across the breakfast table. She still made cutting remarks and accidentally ruined things. But there was less venom in it now. More testing than attacking. And sometimes rarely, but sometimes Clara caught Sarah watching her with something that wasn't quite hatred. Lizzie was harder to reach. The middle daughter was a ghost in her own house, always there, but never quite present, fading into corners and shadows, watching everything with those two big eyes. Clara learned her routines, the way she straightened her collection of buttons and feathers every morning, the way she counted her steps on the stairs, always 7, never 6 or 8. The way she checked under her bed 3 times before sleep, looking for monsters that weren't there. Fear. The girl was swimming in it. On the 8th day, Clara found Lizzie crying in the schoolroom. Silent tears, the kind that came from long practice at hiding emotion. "Lizzie, what's wrong?" The girl flinched violently, then tried to scrub the tears away with her sleeve. "Nothing. I'm fine." Clara sat down in the chair beside her. "You don't look fine." "I am. I'm fine. Everything's fine." "All right." Clara didn't push. "Mind if I sit here for a while? My feet are tired." Lizzie nodded, her eyes darting to the door like she expected someone to come bursting through at any moment. They sat in silence. Clara waited. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I lost one." "Lost one what?" "A button, the blue one with the silver edge." Fresh tears spilled down Lizzie's cheeks. "It was from Mama's dress. The dress she wore when she left. I found it on the floor after she was gone, and I kept it, and now it's lost, and I can't find it anywhere, and—" Her breath was coming faster now, panic rising. "I've looked everywhere. I've looked, and it's gone, and I can't. Breathe, Lizzie." Clara's voice was calm, steady. "Just breathe. I can't lose it. It's all I have. It's the only thing. Listen to me." Clara reached out slowly, giving the girl time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, Clara took her small, trembling hand. "We're going to find that button. Together. All right?" Lizzie looked up at her with desperate hope. "You'll help me." "Of course I will." "But it's just a button. Mrs. Pearson says I'm being silly. She says I should throw all my collections away because they're cluttering up my room, and it ain't just a button." Clara squeezed her hand gently. "It's something that matters to you, and things that matter deserve to be found." They searched for 2 hours. They looked under beds and behind dressers, and inside every crack and crevice the button might have rolled into. Clara enlisted Ruth's help. The little girl was delighted to be included, and even Sarah joined in. Eventually, though she pretended she was just looking for something she'd lost. Maggie watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. It was Ruth who found it, finally wedged between the floorboards under Lizzie's windowsill. "Found it? Found it." Lizzie burst into tears. Relief this time, not despair. She clutched the button to her chest like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she whispered to Clara. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." "You're welcome, sweetheart." That night at supper, Lizzie sat closer to Clara than she ever had before. Not touching, not quite, but present, visible. And when Clara looked up, she caught Maggie watching with something that might have been curiosity. Just curiosity. But it was a start. Thomas noticed the changes. He didn't say anything directly that wasn't his way, but Clara saw him watching, saw him register the subtle shifts in his daughter's behavior. The way Sarah's attacks were losing their edge. The way Lizzie no longer flinched when Clara entered a room. The way Ruth had started following Clara around like a duckling following its mother. On the 12th day, he found Clara in the kitchen helping Martha with the bread. "Mrs. Mercer, a word?" She followed him to his study, wiping flour from her hands. "The girls seem different," he said once the door was closed. "These past few days. Do they? Sarah hasn't tried to put anything in your bed since the mouse. Lizzie actually spoke at dinner last night, a full sentence, not just yes or no. Ruth won't stop talking about how you braid her hair." He paused. "And Maggie?" "What about Maggie?" "She asked me about you. This morning." Clara went still. "Asked what?" "Where you came from. What happened to your family. Why you're really here." Thomas's eyes met hers. "She's trying to figure you out." "Is that good or bad? With Maggie?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "It's the first interest she's shown in anyone since her mother left. I'd call that progress." Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Don't get comfortable yet," Thomas warned. "Maggie doesn't trust easily, and when she does decide about someone one way or the other, she doesn't change her mind." "Noted. She's also the most like me." His voice dropped. "Stubborn, proud, terrible at showing feelings." A pause. "If you can reach her, you can reach all of them. But if she decides you're a threat, she'll burn the whole house down to get rid of me." Thomas didn't deny it. "I'll be careful," Clara said. "See that you are." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Mr. Holloway." "Yes." "The girls, they're not monsters. They're not even difficult, really. They're just scared." She met his eyes. "Children act out when they can't find the words for what they feel. Everything they've done to me, everything they've done to the women before me, it's not cruelty. It's a question." "What question?" "Will you leave me too?" Thomas's face went blank. Then something cracked behind his eyes. Pain-guilt recognition. "I haven't left," he said quietly. "I've been here the whole time." "Physically, yes, but there's more than one way to be absent, Mr. Holloway, and your daughters know the difference." She walked out before he could respond. Maybe it was cruel saying that. Maybe it was overstepping. But Clara had watched this family for almost 2 weeks now, and she'd seen the truth that no one wanted to name. Thomas Holloway was drowning. He'd been drowning since Victoria left, maybe since before. And in his struggle to keep his head above water, he'd stopped seeing that his daughters were drowning too. Someone needed to throw them all a rope. Clara just hoped she was strong enough to hold it. The test came on the 14th day. Clara was in the schoolroom with the girls working through arithmetic problems when Martha appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Holloway needs you. Now." Something in the housekeeper's voice made Clara's stomach drop. "Girls, continue with your problems. I'll be back shortly." She found Thomas in his study, standing at the window with a letter clutched in his hand. His face was ashen. "What is it?" He handed her the letter without speaking. Clara read it once. Then again. "Dear Mr. Holloway, it has come to our attention that your household arrangements have become a matter of concern. Reliable sources have informed us that you are employing an unknown woman of questionable background to care for your minor children. As the grandmother of Margaret, Sarah, Elizabeth, and Ruth Holloway, I have both the right and the responsibility to ensure their well-being. I will be arriving at Clearwater Ranch within the fortnight to assess the situation personally. Should I find the children's care to be inadequate, I will have no choice but to pursue legal remedies. The Courts of Wyoming Territory. I am confident will agree that 4 young girls deserve better than a grieving widower and a vagrant housekeeper. I remain Constance Ashford Wellington." Clara's blood went cold. "Who is Constance Wellington?" "Victoria's mother." Thomas's voice was hollow. "She never approved of our marriage. Never approved of me. When Victoria left, she blamed me entirely. Said I'd driven her daughter away with my coldness, my obsession with work, my—" He stopped, swallowed. "She's been threatening to take the girls for 2 years. Threatening. Letters, lawyers, vague mentions of concerned judges and unfit environments." His hands clenched at his sides. "I've ignored her until now. She lives in Denver. I thought distance would keep her at bay. What changed? I don't know. Maybe she finally found a judge who'll listen. Maybe she's decided I'm vulnerable enough to attack. His eyes met Clara's. Maybe she heard about you. Clara thought about the letter. Reliable sources. Unknown woman. Questionable background. Someone's been talking to her. Someone always is. Constance has money. Money buys loyalty, or what passes for it. What does she want really? The girls. Or more accurately, she wants to take everything I have left. Victoria was her only child. Her pride. When Victoria chose me over a proper Denver society husband, Constance never forgave either of us. Thomas's jaw tightened. Taking my daughters would be the ultimate victory. Proof that I was never worthy of her daughter or her grandchildren. Clara set the letter down on his desk. What are you going to do? I don't know. The words came out ragged. Fight her, I suppose. But she has connections I don't have. Money I don't have. If she finds the right judge, the right lawyer, she won't. Thomas looked at her. You sound certain. I am certain. Clara stepped closer. I've seen your daughters, Mr. Holloway. I've watched them these past 2 weeks. They're hurt and scared and angry, but they're not neglected. They're not abused. They're not in danger. Any judge with eyes will see that. Unless she poisons those eyes first. Then we make sure she doesn't get the chance. Clara's voice hardened. When she arrives, your daughters need to be clean-fed, healthy, and obviously loved. Your house needs to be in order. Your staff needs to speak well of you. And She paused. You what? I need to not be here. Thomas's head snapped up. What? The letter calls me an unknown woman of questionable background. She's right, I am unknown. I showed up at your door with nothing but the clothes on my back. No references, no history, no proof that I'm anything other than a vagrant who got lucky. You're not. I know what I am, but Constance Wellington doesn't. And if she finds some destitute widow caring for her granddaughters, she'll use it. She'll twist it. She'll make it sound like you're so desperate you'd hire anyone off the street. Thomas was shaking his head. I won't send you away. Not after everything you've... I ain't saying you should send me away. I'm saying we need to think about how this looks. Clara took a breath. What do you know about me, Mr. Holloway? Really know. I know you're a widow. That you lost your husband and 2 children. That you walked 3 weeks to get here. And that's it. You don't know where I came from. You don't know who my people were. You don't know anything that would satisfy a judge or a grandmother looking for reasons to take your daughters. The truth of it hung in the air between them. Thomas sank into his chair. So what do you suggest? Write letters to people I worked for in Kansas, to the minister who married Samuel and me, to anyone who can vouch that I ain't some criminal or lunatic. Clara paused. It'll take time, weeks probably, but by the time your mother-in-law arrives, you'll have proof that I'm exactly what I say I am. And if the letters don't come in time? Clara met his eyes. Then I disappear until they do. Hide in town maybe, or with one of the Hands families. Somewhere Constance Wellington won't think to look. No. The word came out sharp, fierce. Mr. Holloway. I said no. Thomas rose from his chair. I won't hide you like some shameful secret. I won't pretend you don't exist just because some bitter old woman wants to punish me for her daughter's choices. This ain't about me. It's about your daughters. My daughters need you. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised Clara. Ruth asks for you every morning. Lizzie has stopped having nightmares. Sarah hasn't tried to sabotage anything in days. Even Maggie. He stopped. Even Maggie is starting to look at you like you might be real. Clara's throat tightened. That don't change the facts. The facts can go to hell. Thomas stepped closer. I've spent 2 years trying to hold this family together. 2 years of watching my daughters build walls I couldn't climb. 2 years of feeling like a failure every single day. His voice dropped. And then you showed up, ragged and starving, and somehow you did what I couldn't. You made them believe that someone might actually stay. Clara didn't know what to say. I won't sacrifice that, Thomas continued. Not for Constance Wellington, not for anyone. Even if it means losing them. I'd rather fight and lose than surrender without trying. His jaw set. We'll write your letters. We'll prepare the house. We'll make everything so perfect that even Constance Wellington won't be able to find fault. And when she arrives, yes, we'll face her together. Together. The word settled into Clara's chest like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, touching things she'd thought were dead. All right, she said quietly. Together. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind howl around the house. She thought about the letter, about Constance Wellington with her money and her connections and her bitter hunger for revenge. She thought about Thomas, broken, determined Thomas, ready to fight for daughters he barely knew how to reach. She thought about the girls, about everything they'd survived and everything they still had to face. And she thought about herself. 2 weeks ago she'd been a beggar, a vagrant, a woman with nothing but grief and the stubborn refusal to die. Now she was part of something fragile and damaged and worth fighting for. Clara had walked 300 miles to find this place. She wasn't going to let some wealthy grandmother take it away. The letters went out the next morning. Clara wrote 3 of them herself to the minister in Lawrence, who had married her and Samuel, to the doctor, who had delivered both her children to the widow Henderson, who had been her neighbor for 4 years, before the fire took everything. Thomas wrote his own to business associates, to the territorial governor he'd met twice at cattle auctions, to anyone with a name that might carry weight in a courtroom. Then they waited. The days that followed were strange, half preparation, half pretending nothing had changed. Clara continued her work with the girls. Thomas continued running the ranch. Martha continued her quiet efficiency in the kitchen. But underneath it all, a clock was ticking. Constance Wellington was coming, and everything they'd built could crumble the moment she arrived. On the 16th day, Clara was braiding Ruth's hair when Maggie appeared in the doorway. The oldest girl had been watching Clara more closely since the letter arrived. Not with hostility that had faded somewhere around the 2nd week, but with something harder to read. Calculation, maybe. Assessment. Can I talk to you? Clara's hand stilled on Ruth's hair. Of course. Alone. Ruth turned her half-finished braid swinging. But she's not done yet. I'll finish when I get back, Clara promised. Go find Lizzie. I think she's looking for someone to help sort her button collection. Ruth considered this, then nodded and scampered off. Clara rose from her chair and faced Maggie. What's on your mind? Maggie didn't answer right away. She stepped into the room, closed the door behind her, and stood there with her arms crossed, a pose that made her look far older than 12. I know about the letter. Clara went still. What letter? Don't. Maggie's voice was sharp. I'm not stupid. I heard Father talking to Martha this morning. I know Grandmother is coming. I know she wants to take us away. There was no point in lying. Maggie would see through it in a heartbeat. Yes, she's coming. When? Within the fortnight, the letter said. Could be any day now. Maggie's jaw tightened. And what are you going to do about it? Everything I can. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Clara met the girl's eyes steadily. Your father and I are gathering proof that I ain't some vagrant who wandered in off the street. We're preparing the house, preparing you girls, preparing everything we can think of. But I ain't going to promise you it'll be enough because I don't know if it will be. Something flickered in Maggie's expression. Surprise maybe at the honesty. The other women would have lied, she said slowly. Told me everything was fine. Told me not to worry. I ain't the other women. No. Maggie was quiet for a moment. You're not. She moved to the window and stood there looking out at nothing. I remember when Grandmother came to visit, once. I was 8. Ruth wasn't born yet, and Lizzie was just a baby. Her voice was flat controlled. She looked at us like we were mud on her shoes, told Mother we were adequate specimens, but could use more polish. Clara's stomach turned. Adequate specimens. That's how she talks, like we're horses at an auction. Maggie turned back. She doesn't want us because she loves us. She wants us because taking us would hurt Father, and because she thinks she can turn us into... She stopped, swallowed. Into copies of Mother, pretty and polished and perfect. And what do you want? The question seemed to catch Maggie off guard. What do you want, Maggie? Not your grandmother, not your father, you. For a long moment the girl didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to stay here. This is my home. These are my sisters. Father is... She hesitated. Father is trying. I can see that now. He doesn't know how to talk to us, doesn't know how to be what we need, but he's trying. Clara waited. And you? Maggie looked at her directly. You're trying too. Harder than any of the others. You actually listen. You don't pretend everything is fine when it isn't. You don't treat us like problems to be solved. Because you're not problems, you're people. The others didn't see it that way. Then the others were fools. Something shifted in Maggie's face. The last wall, the one she'd been clinging to since the day Clara arrived, crumbled. I don't want to go with grandmother, she said, and her voice cracked. I don't want to wear fancy dresses and learn to pour tea and marry some man she picks for me. I want to stay here. I want... Tears spilled down her cheeks. I want things to be okay. Just once. I want something to go right. Clara crossed the room and pulled the girl into her arms. Maggie resisted for half a second. Then she collapsed against Clara's shoulder, sobbing with the kind of desperate grief that had been building for 2 years. I'm so tired, she choked out. I've been taking care of everyone since Mama left. Sarah and Lizzie and Ruth. They need someone, and Father was falling apart, and there wasn't anyone else. I had to be strong. I had to hold everything together. I know, sweetheart, I know. But I'm only 12. I'm not supposed to... I can't... You're not supposed to carry this alone. Clara held her tighter. No one is. Especially not a child. I'm not a child. You're allowed to be. Clara pulled back just enough to meet Maggie's eyes. You're allowed to be scared and angry and sad. You're allowed to need help. You're allowed to let someone else carry the weight for a while. But what if you leave too? There it was, the question underneath everything. The fear that had driven every test, every attack, every wall. What if you leave too? Clara cupped Maggie's face in her hands. Listen to me. I can't promise I'll never leave. That's a promise nobody can keep. But I can promise you this, I will never leave without warning. I will never disappear in the middle of the night, and I will fight like hell to stay. Why, you barely know us. Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. And I know what it feels like to find something worth fighting for. Clara's voice softened. You girls, you're worth fighting for. Every single one of you. Maggie stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the beginning of trust, and that was enough. The carriage arrived 3 days later. Clara was in the kitchen with Martha when they heard the wheels on the gravel drive. Her hands went still on the bread dough. She's here, Martha said quietly. Her face was grim. Get the girls. Make sure they're clean and presentable. I'll find Mr. Holloway. Clara wiped her hands and moved through the house on legs that felt steadier than they had any right to be. She found Thomas in his study, already rising from his desk. I heard. What's the plan? We greet her. We're polite. We don't give her anything she can use against us. His jaw tightened. And we don't let her anywhere near the girls alone. They walked to the front door together. Constance Ashford Wellington was exactly what Clara had expected, and worse. She was tall, elegant, dressed in traveling clothes that cost more than Clara had ever earned in a year. Her silver hair was perfectly styled. Her face was beautiful in the way of preserved things, cold and ageless, and utterly without warmth. She looked at Thomas like he was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Thomas. Constance. I see the ranch is still standing. I half expected to find it in ruins. Her gaze swept to Clara. And who is this? Mrs. Clara Mercer. She helps care for the girls. Ah, yes, the vagrant I've heard so much about. Clara met the woman's eyes without flinching. I prefer widow, ma'am. Vagrant implies I chose to have nothing. Something flickered in Constance's expression. Surprise, maybe. She hadn't expected the hired help to have a spine. How spirited. She turned back to Thomas. I wish to see my granddaughters. Immediately. They're in the parlor. But Constance, I don't require your permission to see my own blood, Thomas. Kindly remember that. She swept past them into the house. Thomas and Clara exchanged a look. This was going to be a long day. The girls were waiting in the parlor, lined up like soldiers facing inspection. Martha had done her work well. They were scrubbed clean, dressed in their best clothes, hair brushed and ribboned. But their faces told another story. Maggie stood at the end of the line, her expression carved from stone. Sarah's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Lizzie was trembling visibly. Only Ruth seemed unaffected, studying her grandmother with open curiosity. Children. Constance's voice was cool as she examined each of them in turn. You've grown. No one responded. Margaret, stand up straight. Sarah, uncross your arms, it's unladylike. Elizabeth, stop fidgeting. Her gaze landed on Ruth. And who is this little creature? I'm Ruth, the 4-year-old said clearly. I'm 4. Who are you? Constance's eyebrow rose. I am your grandmother. Surely someone has told you about me? Maggie says you're mean. Clara heard Thomas make a strangled sound behind her. Maggie's face went white. But Constance only smiled a thin, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Does she indeed? Well, children do say the most interesting things. She turned to Thomas. I wish to inspect their living quarters, their schoolroom, their daily routine. Of course. Clara, would you? The hired help won't be necessary. Constance's voice was sharp. I wish to see how this household functions without... She paused. Outside interference. Thomas hesitated. Clara could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Very well, he said finally. Maggie, please show your grandmother to the schoolroom. I'll join you shortly. Maggie's eyes darted to Clara, a brief, panicked look, then back to her grandmother. Yes, father. The girls filed out of the parlor, Constance following like a hawk trailing mice. Clara watched them go with a knot in her stomach. This is wrong, she said quietly once they were alone. She's going to tear them apart. I know. Thomas's voice was tight. But I can't refuse her. Not without giving her ammunition. She already has ammunition. She's here to collect more. Then we don't give her any. He met Clara's eyes. The girls know what's at stake. They'll hold their own. They're children, Thomas. They shouldn't have to hold their own against... I know. His voice cracked. I know, Clara, but I don't have a choice. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. Clara paced the parlor while Thomas sat motionless in his chair, staring at the fire. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. Finally, footsteps sounded in the hallway. The girls came first, all 4 of them, faces pale but composed. Behind them came Constance, and something in her expression made Clara's blood run cold. Satisfaction. The woman looked satisfied. Well? Constance settled into a chair like a queen taking her throne. I've seen quite enough. Thomas rose. And it's exactly as I feared. These children are running wild. Their education is sporadic at best. Their living quarters are adequate but hardly suitable for young ladies of breeding. And She paused, glancing at Clara. Their primary caretaker has no credentials, no references, no qualifications beyond a willingness to work cheap. That isn't true. Clara stepped forward. I have references. Letters are being gathered. Letters can be forged. References can be bought. Constance waved a dismissive hand. I've seen enough women like you to know what you are. A fortune hunter. A schemer. Someone who saw a wealthy widower with a house full of motherless children and thought, "That's enough." Thomas's voice was sharp. "You will not speak to Mrs. Mercer that way." "I will speak however I please." Constance rose, her eyes blazing. "You drove my daughter away, Thomas. You broke her spirit with your coldness, your neglect, your obsession with this—" She gestured at the walls. "This dirt farm in the middle of nowhere." Victoria made her own choices. Victoria was desperate. Desperate enough to run into the arms of any man who showed her kindness. That's what you drove her to. Clara saw the blow land, saw Thomas flinch like he'd been struck. "And now," Constance continued, "you're raising her children in the same neglect, the same emotional wasteland. Do you even know your daughters, Thomas? Do you know what they fear, what they dream, what they need?" "I'm learning." "Learning." Constance laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "You've had 12 years to learn. You've had Margaret's entire childhood to learn. And what have you learned? How to hire strangers to do the work you can't be bothered with." "That's not fair." Everyone turned. Maggie stood in the center of the room, her small frame trembling with fury. "Maggie," Thomas started. "No." The girl's voice was fierce. "She doesn't get to say those things. She doesn't get to come into our home and—" "Margaret, sit down." Constance's voice was sharp. "Children do not interrupt adults." "I'm not interrupting. I'm defending my father. Your father doesn't deserve defending." "Yes, he does." Maggie stepped forward and Clara saw something she'd never seen before. The wounded girl transformed into something powerful. Something fierce. "Father isn't perfect. He works too much. He doesn't always know what to say. But he's here. He's been here every single day since Mama left. He didn't run away. He didn't abandon us. He stayed." Constance's face tightened. "Staying isn't enough. It's more than Mama did." Maggie's voice cracked. "It's more than you did. You never visited, never wrote, never sent birthday presents or Christmas cards. You didn't care about us until you saw a chance to hurt Father. That's quite enough." "No, it isn't." Sarah stepped up beside her sister. "Maggie's right. You don't care about us. You care about winning. You care about punishing Father because Mama left and you need someone to blame." "Girls, please." Thomas's voice was strained. "We're not going with her." Lizzie's voice was barely above a whisper, but the words carried. "We don't want to live in Denver. We don't want to be—" She swallowed. "Adequate specimens." Even Ruth spoke up, her small voice clear as a bell. "Mrs. Mercer braids my hair better than anyone, and she tells the truth. Grandmother lies." Constance's face had gone the color of old ash. "You've turned them against me," she hissed at Thomas. "You and that woman—" "We haven't turned them against anyone." Clara's voice was calm. "We've just given them the chance to speak for themselves. I will not stand here and be insulted by servants and children." Constance gathered her skirts. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers, Thomas. All of you will." She swept from the room. The front door slammed. Carriage wheels crunched on gravel, then faded into the distance. And then there was silence. Thomas stood frozen in the middle of the parlor, his face blank with shock. The girls huddled together, adrenaline fading into fear. "Did we do the right thing?" Sarah asked quietly. "Father?" Thomas didn't answer. He just crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled all 4 of his daughters into his arms. It was the first time Clara had seen him hold them. Really hold them, not careful, not distant, but fierce and desperate, and overflowing with the love he'd never known how to show. "I'm so proud of you," he choked out. "All of you. So proud." Maggie buried her face in his shoulder. Sarah clung to his arm. Lizzie pressed close to his side. Ruth wrapped her arms around his leg and held on tight. Clara stood apart watching. She knew this moment wasn't hers. It belonged to them, this family that had been shattered and was finally beginning to heal. But then Thomas looked up. "Clara." She blinked. "Sir, get over here." She hesitated. "Now." She crossed the room. Thomas reached out with his free arm and pulled her into the circle, and for the first time in 18 months, for the first time since Emma, since Samuel, since everything, Clara Mercer felt like she belonged. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, Thomas found Clara on the front porch. She was sitting in the same chair where she'd eaten her first meal at Clearwater Ranch, staring out at the darkened pastures. "Mind if I join you?" "It's your porch." He sat down beside her. For a long moment neither spoke. "She'll be back," Clara said finally. "With lawyers, with judges, with everything money can buy." "I know. We might not win." "I know that too." Clara turned to look at him. "Then why aren't you scared?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I am scared. Terrified, actually. But tonight, watching my daughters stand up to that woman, watching them fight for this family." He shook his head. "Something changed. I realized I've been so busy trying to protect them that I forgot to let them protect themselves. They're strong. They are. Stronger than I knew." He paused. "Stronger than me, maybe." "You're plenty strong, Thomas." "Am I?" He turned to face her. "I couldn't reach them. 2 years, and I couldn't break through those walls. You did it in weeks." "It wasn't just me. It was them. They were ready." "They were ready because of you." Clara looked away. The wind was cold on her face, but she didn't move to go inside. "When I arrived here," she said quietly, "I was dead inside. Empty. I thought I'd never feel anything again. And then—" She stopped. "And then Ruth asked me to braid her hair, and Lizzie let me help find her button, and Sarah cried in my arms, and Maggie—" Her voice cracked. "Maggie let me in." Thomas's hand found hers in the darkness. "Stay," he said. "I intend to." "No, I mean—" He hesitated. "Stay. Not as a hired woman, not as a trial. Stay as—" He couldn't finish the sentence. But he didn't have to. Clara turned to look at him. This broken man who had opened his door to a stranger and given her a reason to live. "We should focus on the legal battle first," she said softly. "One thing at a time." "Is that a no?" "It's a not yet." Thomas squeezed her hand. "I can live with not yet." They sat together in the darkness, hands intertwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. The war wasn't over. Constance Wellington would return with lawyers and accusations and all the weapons money could buy. There would be hearings and testimonies and battles that hadn't even begun yet. But tonight they had won something important. Tonight a family had found its voice. And Clara Mercer, who had buried everyone she loved, who had walked 300 miles with nothing but grief and stubbornness, had found something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The summons arrived 9 days later. Clara was helping Ruth with her letters when Martha appeared in the schoolroom doorway, her face grim. "Mr. Holloway needs you, both of you." She glanced at Maggie, who was supervising her sister's lessons. "All of you." They found Thomas in his study, a document spread across his desk. His face was pale. "Constance has filed for emergency custody," he said without preamble. "The hearing is in 2 weeks, in Cheyenne." Clara felt the floor shift beneath her feet. 2 weeks. "She's calling witnesses, former ranch hands, the women who worked here before at least 3 of them have agreed to testify." Thomas's jaw tightened. "She's claiming I'm mentally unstable, that I keep dangerous animals on the property, that I've entrusted my children to an unqualified stranger with no background." "The reference letters—" "Haven't arrived yet. 2 weeks, Clara. We have 2 weeks to prove that everything she's saying is a lie." Maggie stepped forward, her face hard. "Then we prove it." Thomas looked at his oldest daughter. Something passed between them, an understanding that hadn't existed a month ago. "We will," he said quietly. "Together." The days that followed blurred into a frenzy of preparation. Thomas's lawyer, a thin-faced man named Harrison from Cheyenne, arrived to help build their case. He interviewed everyone: Clara, Martha, the ranch hands, even the girls themselves. He took notes, asked questions, probed for weaknesses. "The character witnesses will help," he told Thomas on the fourth day. "But they're not enough. Constance Wellington has money connections and a judge who owes her favors. We need something that shifts the narrative entirely." "Like what?" Harrison hesitated. "A mother's testimony carries more weight than anything else. If Victoria could be found, if she would speak on your behalf." "Victoria hasn't been seen in 2 years." Thomas's voice was flat. "She doesn't want to be found. Still, if there was any way to reach her—" "There isn't." Clara watched this exchange in silence. She'd thought about Victoria often since arriving at Clearwater Ranch, the woman who had walked away from 4 daughters, the ghost whose absence still haunted every corner of this house. But reaching her was impossible. Victoria had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Unless— "Mr. Harrison?" Clara said slowly. "Who has Constance Wellington been talking to? Who told her about me?" The lawyer frowned. "We don't know. Her sources are confidential." "Someone on this ranch. Someone who knows what happens inside these walls." Clara's mind was racing. Someone who might also know where Victoria went. Thomas caught her meaning. His eyes widened. "You think one of the hands—" "I think somebody's been feeding information to Denver, and that somebody might know more than they've let on." The investigation took 3 days. Clara spoke to every ranch hand, every stable boy, every person who had access to Clearwater Ranch. She asked questions casually, carefully, never revealing what she was looking for. On the 3rd day, she found her answer. His name was William Garrett, a younger hand who'd worked at the ranch for 6 months. He was nervous when Clara approached him, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "Mrs. Mercer, I don't know what you've been writing to Constance Wellington." He went white. "Don't bother denying it. I've seen the letters in your bunk, the ones with the Denver postmark." For a long moment, Garrett was silent. Then his shoulders slumped. "She paid me," he said quietly. $50 to report on what happened here. Who came and went. How Mr. Holloway treated the children." Clara felt a cold fury building in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "Why?" "Because I needed the money. My mother's sick back east. The doctors cost—" He shook his head. "I'm not proud of it. But I didn't lie to her. Everything I told her was true. Including information about me." "Yes." He couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry." Clara wanted to rage at him, wanted to scream about loyalty and betrayal and the damage his letters had caused. Instead, she asked one more question. "Do you know where Victoria Holloway went when she left?" Garrett hesitated. "I know she was heading to San Francisco. That's where the lawyer she ran off with had business. But—" He paused. "But I heard something else too. From Mrs. Wellington's letters. Something about Victoria writing to her mother a few months back." Clara's heart stopped. "Victoria contacted Constance." "Not exactly. I think she was trying to find out how the girls were doing, through back channels, without anyone knowing." Garrett swallowed. "Mrs. Wellington was furious about it. Said something about her daughter's guilt being useful leverage." Clara's mind was racing. Victoria had reached out. Victoria wanted to know about her children, which meant Victoria might be reachable after all. She brought the information to Thomas that night. He listened in silence, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked almost like hope. "Victoria wrote to her mother," he repeated slowly, "after 2 years of nothing. She wanted to know about the girls." "Why now? Why after all this time?" "I don't know. Guilt maybe. Or—" Clara hesitated. "Or maybe she never stopped caring. Maybe she just didn't know how to come back." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Even if we could find her," he said finally, "why would she help?" She left. She chose to leave. Why would she stand up in a courtroom and defend the family she abandoned? Because her mother is trying to take her children. And whatever else Victoria did, I don't believe she'd want that. You don't know her. No. But I know what it's like to lose children. And I know that kind of loss never stops hurting no matter how far you run. Clara met his eyes. Victoria might have left, but she's still their mother. That counts for something. Thomas stared at her. You want to find her. I want to give us every possible chance of winning. If that means finding Victoria, then yes. It could backfire. She could side with her mother. She could make things worse. She could. Clara's voice was steady. But if we don't try, we'll never know. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Thomas nodded. Find her. The letter went out the next morning. Clara wrote it herself, addressed to Victoria Holloway, at the last known address Harrison could find, a boarding house in San Francisco. She didn't know if Victoria still lived there. She didn't know if the letter would ever arrive, but she wrote it anyway. Mrs. Holloway. You don't know me. My name is Clara Mercer, and I work at Clearwater Ranch caring for your daughters. I'm writing because your mother has filed for emergency custody of Margaret, Sarah, Elizabeth, and Ruth. The hearing is in 10 days. If she wins, the girls will be taken to Denver and raised under her control. I know you had your reasons for leaving. I'm not writing to judge you or ask you to explain yourself. I'm writing because your daughters need someone to speak for them. Someone who can tell the court that their father is not the monster Constance Wellington claims. I've watched Thomas Holloway with those girls. I've seen him try to reach them, fail, and try again. He's not perfect, but he loves them. And they love him even if they don't always know how to show it. Your mother doesn't love them. She wants to hurt Thomas. She wants revenge for what happened to your marriage. And she's willing to use 4 innocent children to get it. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to be their mother again. I'm only asking you to tell the truth in person, in writing, whatever you can manage. The hearing is in Cheyenne on the 15th of next month. Please. Clara Mercer. She sealed the letter and gave it to the fastest rider on the ranch. Then she waited. The days crawled by. Preparations continued. Harrison built their case witness lists, character references, documented evidence of the girls' health and happiness. Thomas practiced his testimony until the words came naturally. The girls rehearsed what they would say if the judge asked to speak with them. But underneath it all, a question hung in the air. Would Victoria come? Clara didn't tell the girls about the letter. There was no point in raising hopes that might be crushed. She barely told Thomas, just enough to let him know she'd tried. And if she doesn't respond, he asked, then we fight without her. Will it be enough? Clara wished she could promise it would be, but she'd learned a long time ago that promises were dangerous things. It'll have to be, she said. The night before they left for Cheyenne, Clara found Maggie sitting alone on the front porch. The girl was wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the darkened pastures. She didn't look up when Clara sat down beside her. Can't sleep. Maggie shook her head. Me neither. They sat in silence for a moment. What if we lose? Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper. What if the judge believes grandmother? What if... Then we keep fighting. We appeal. We find another way. But what if there isn't another way? Clara thought about the question, about all the battles she'd fought and lost, the children she couldn't save, the husband. She couldn't keep the life she couldn't hold together. Then we survive, she said quietly. That's what we do. We survive and we keep going. And we never stop trying to get back what we lost. Maggie turned to look at her. Is that what you did? After your daughter? Clara's throat tightened. Yes, that's what I did. Did it work? I'm here, aren't I? Maggie was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she leaned against Clara's shoulder. I'm glad you came here, she whispered. I'm glad Father let you stay. Clara wrapped an arm around the girl's thin shoulders. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." The courthouse in Cheyenne was smaller than Clara had expected. A single room with wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, two tables facing each other across a narrow aisle. It felt less like a temple of justice, and more like an arena where lives would be won or lost. Constance Wellington was already seated when they arrived, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. She looked at Thomas like he was something unpleasant she'd scraped off her shoe. The girls sat in the front row behind their father's table, pressed close together. Maggie's face was stone. Sarah's hands were clenched into fists. Lizzie was trembling. Only Ruth seemed calm, clutching her worn teddy bear like a shield. Clara sat beside them, close enough to touch, but careful not to interfere. This wasn't her battle. It was theirs. Judge Harrington entered at precisely 9 o'clock, a silver-haired man with a face like carved granite. He settled into his chair, arranged his papers, and looked out at the assembled parties with eyes that gave nothing away. "This court is now in session. The matter before us is the petition of Constance Ashford Wellington for emergency custody of the minor children, Margaret Sarah Elizabeth and Ruth Holloway." He turned to Constance's table. "Counsel for the petitioner may present their opening statement." The lead lawyer, a silver-tongued man named Bradford, rose with practiced grace. "Your Honor, we are here today because 4 innocent children are being raised in an environment that is fundamentally unsafe." He painted a picture with words. Dangerous animals, volatile tempers, unqualified caregivers, neglect dressed up as frontier self-reliance. Every sentence was designed to make Thomas look like a monster, and Constance like a concerned grandmother with no agenda beyond her granddaughter's welfare. Clara watched the judge's face. It gave nothing away. Harrison's response was measured, careful, pointing out the lack of evidence. The financial motivations, the convenient timing of this sudden concern for children, Constance had ignored for years. Then the witnesses began. Constance's lawyers called former ranch hands who testified to Thomas's long hours and short temper. They called women who had worked at Clearwater Ranch before Clara, women who described the children as wild, uncontrollable, and desperately in need of a firm hand. "The oldest one threatened me with scissors," one woman said, her voice quavering with remembered fear. "And the second one put a snake in my bed, a snake." "And the father," Bradford prompted. "How did Mr. Holloway respond to these incidents?" "He barely noticed. He was always working, always somewhere else. Those children could have burned the house down, and he wouldn't have seen it until the smoke reached his study." Clara watched the words land, watched the judge's expression shift almost imperceptibly. They were losing. Harrison called his own witnesses, Ezekiel Johnson, who testified to Thomas's character and dedication. Martha Pearson, who described a household that ran smoothly despite its challenges. Old Pete from the stables, who had known Thomas since boyhood and swore he was a good man trying his best. But good character wasn't enough to counter the specific accusations. The judge needed more. The respondent calls Clara Mercer. Clara rose on legs that felt steadier than they should have. She walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down. Harrison approached her gently. "Mrs. Mercer, please tell the court how you came to be employed at Clearwater Ranch." She told the story simply. The weeks of walking, the 19 rejections, the morning she arrived at Thomas's gates with nothing but hunger and determination. "And what is your assessment of Mr. Holloway as a father?" "He's devoted to his daughters." Clara's voice was steady. "He works too hard, that's true. And he doesn't always know how to show what he feels. But I've watched him learn. I've watched him try. And I've watched those girls start to trust again, because they can see he's never going to give up on them." "And Mrs. Wellington, what is your assessment of her motivations?" "She doesn't want those children because she loves them. She wants them because taking them would hurt their father. It's revenge dressed up as concern." Bradford rose for cross-examination, his smile sharp. "Mrs. Mercer, you arrived at Clearwater Ranch as what might be called a vagrant, correct? No references, no history, No proof of anything you claimed about yourself. I was homeless. I wasn't a vagrant. There's a difference. Is there? You showed up destitute at a wealthy man's door and immediately began working your way into his household, into his family. Some might call that opportunism. Some might call it surviving. And now here you are defending that same man in court. One might almost think you had a personal stake in the outcome. Clara met his eyes. I have a stake in those children's happiness. That's personal enough for me. The questioning continued, but Clara held firm. She didn't flinch, didn't waver, didn't give Bradford anything he could use. When she finally stepped down, she saw something in Thomas's eyes that looked like gratitude. But they still needed more. The respondent calls Margaret Holloway. Maggie rose from her seat and walked to the witness stand. She looked impossibly small up there, 12 years old, facing down a courtroom full of adults who would decide her fate. But her back was straight, and her voice was clear. State your name for the record. Margaret Jane Holloway, but everyone calls me Maggie. Maggie, I need you to tell the judge about your life at Clearwater Ranch, about your father. The girl took a breath. Father isn't perfect. He works too much. He doesn't always know what to say. Her voice strengthened. But he's there. Every single morning, every single night. He didn't run away when things got hard. He stayed. And your grandmother? Maggie's eyes found Constance in the gallery. I met her once, when I was 8. She looked at us like we were horses at an auction, called us adequate specimens. Her voice hardened. She doesn't want us because she loves us. She wants us because taking us would hurt Father. Bradford rose. Your Honor, I object. The child is telling the truth. Maggie's voice cut through his objection like a knife. I know what grandmother wants. I'm not stupid, and I'm not going anywhere with her. The courtroom went silent. Judge Harrington leaned forward. Miss Holloway, this court takes the wishes of children very seriously. But I need to understand, if your father had shortcomings as the petitioner claims, why do you want to stay with him? Maggie met the judge's eyes. Because he's my father. Because this is my home. Because the people who love us don't leave us when things get hard. Her voice cracked slightly. Mama left. Grandmother never came. But Father stayed. And Mrs. Mercer stayed. That matters more than anything else. Sarah testified next, then Lizzie, in a trembling voice that made Clara's heart ache. Even Ruth spoke up, her childish clarity cutting through the legal formalities. Father reads us stories, she told the judge. Mrs. Mercer braids my hair. Grandmother just looks at us funny. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. The testimonies ended. Harrison and Bradford gave their closing arguments. The judge retired to consider his decision. And they waited. 1 hour. 2. Clara sat with the girls, holding Ruth in her lap, one hand on Lizzie's shoulder. Maggie and Sarah pressed close on either side. Thomas paced the hallway outside, unable to sit still. 3 hours. The door opened. The court has reached a decision. They filed back in hearts pounding. Judge Harrington settled into his chair, his face unreadable. This court finds, he said slowly, that the petition for emergency custody is denied. Clara's breath left her body in a rush. The evidence presented does not support the claim that Thomas Holloway is an unfit parent. The children appear healthy, well cared for, and clearly bonded with their father and their current household. The petitioner's concerns, while presented passionately, do not outweigh the children's own expressed wishes to remain in their home. Constance Wellington made a sound like a wounded animal. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court is troubled by certain aspects of the petitioner's approach. The aggressive investigation of the respondent's household, the apparent financial inducement of witnesses, and the timing of this petition, which coincides suspiciously with the arrival of a new caregiver whom the children have embraced. He turned to Constance directly. Mrs. Wellington, grandparents' rights are important, but they do not supersede the rights of a fit parent. If you wish to maintain a relationship with your granddaughters, I suggest you find a less adversarial approach." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." Clara didn't remember the next few minutes clearly. There were tears, hugs, the girls piling onto their father in a tangle of arms and relief. Constance swept from the courtroom without a word, her lawyers trailing behind. Harrison shook Thomas's hand, saying something about appeals and caution and next steps. But Clara only had eyes for the family in front of her. This family she had stumbled into. This family she had fought for. This family that had somehow impossibly become her own. Thomas looked up and met her eyes across the chaos. "Thank you," he mouthed. Clara shook her head. "We did it together." Ruth broke free from the group and ran to Clara, throwing her arms around her waist. "We won," the little girl said wonderingly. "We really won." Clara knelt down and pulled her close. "We did, sweetheart. We really did." That night they celebrated. Martha made a feast. The ranch hands gathered in the main house for the first time anyone could remember. There was laughter and music, and a lightness that Clara hadn't felt since before she could remember. After the girls were in bed, Ruth protesting she wasn't tired, Sarah too happy to fight Lizzie and Maggie falling asleep mid-sentence, Thomas found Clara on the porch. Their porch now, she realized. The place where everything had begun. "She'll appeal," Thomas said quietly. "Constance won't give up that easily." "I know. There'll be more battles, more hearings, more lawyers." "I know that too." He turned to face her. "Will you stay, for all of it?" Clara looked at him, this man who had opened his door to a stranger and given her a reason to live. This man whose broken family had somehow become her own. "I already told you I would." "That was before we won. Before—" He hesitated. "Before you had a choice." Clara reached out and took his hand. "Thomas Holloway. I've had a choice every single day since I walked through those gates. I chose to stay. I'm still choosing." He pulled her closer. "Why, after everything you've been through, the loss, the grief, the years of having nothing, why would you choose this? Choose us?" Clara thought about Emma, about William, about the husband she'd buried and the children she'd lost and the 300 miles of empty road that had brought her here. "Because you showed me that broken things can be mended," she said softly. "Not made new, not returned to what they were before, but fixed enough to function, fixed enough to matter." She looked up at him. "You and your daughters taught me that. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had none. How could I not choose you after that?" Thomas's hand came up to cup her face. "Clara." "I know, not yet. One thing at a time." She smiled despite herself. "But Thomas, the answer's going to be yes, whenever you get around to asking properly." He laughed a real laugh, warm and surprised and full of something that sounded like joy. "I'll hold you to that." "Please do." They stood together on the porch, hands intertwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. The war wasn't over. There would be more battles to fight, more challenges to face, more moments when everything seemed impossible. But tonight, they had won. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future looked bright. The weeks that followed the hearing brought a peace that Clearwater Ranch hadn't known in years. Constance Wellington retreated to Denver, her lawyer's letters growing less frequent, less threatening, more perfunctory. Harrison assured them she was regrouping, not surrendering, but for now, the storm had passed. And in that calm, something new began to grow. Clara watched it happen day by day. The way Thomas lingered at breakfast, instead of rushing to his study. The way he sat with the girls during their lessons, asking questions, showing interest, being present in ways he hadn't been before. The way he reached for Clara's hand when they walked the property together, as natural as breathing. The girls noticed too. "Father's different," Maggie observed one morning watching Thomas help Ruth with her arithmetic through the schoolroom window. "Softer somehow." "He's not softer," Clara smiled. "He's just not hiding anymore." "Hiding from what?" "From you. From himself. From the fear that he'd fail you the way he thinks he failed your mother. Maggie was quiet for a moment. He didn't fail her. She failed us. Maybe. Or maybe they failed each other. Marriages are complicated that way. Clara turned to face the girl. But that's not what matters now. What matters is what comes next. And what comes next? Clara didn't answer. Some things weren't hers to say. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Clara was in the kitchen with Martha when Thomas came in, his face pale, an envelope clutched in his hand. "It's from Victoria." Clara's heart stopped. She wrote back. Thomas nodded slowly. He stopped, swallowed. "She says she's sorry, for everything. She says she never stopped thinking about the girls, never stopped wondering how they were. She says—" He couldn't continue. He handed Clara the letter. She read it twice, her hands trembling. "Dear Thomas, I received Mrs. Mercer's letter 3 weeks ago. I've started this response 100 times and thrown away every attempt. What do you say to the family you abandoned? What words could possibly be enough? I know I can't undo what I did. I know you have every right to hate me, you and the girls both. I left because I was drowning, because I couldn't breathe, because I looked at my life and saw only walls closing in. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse for what I did to our daughters. But I need you to know this: I never stopped loving them. Not for a single day. I thought about them constantly, wondered if Margaret was still reading everything she could get her hands on, if Sarah was still catching creatures and terrorizing housekeepers, if Elizabeth had outgrown her fears, if Ruth even remembered my face. The answer to that last question haunts me most. She was so young when I left. Does she know she has a mother? Does she care, Mrs. Mercer's letter told me about the custody hearing. I can't tell you how relieved I was to learn you won. My mother is, well, you know what she is. The thought of her raising our daughters makes me physically ill. I won't pretend I have the right to be part of their lives again. I gave up that right when I walked out the door. But if there's ever anything I can do, any way I can help protect them from my mother's scheming, please know that I will. I'm staying in San Francisco for now. The address is below if you ever need to reach me. I'm sorry, Thomas, for everything. I hope someday the girls can forgive me, even if you can't. Victoria. Clara set down the letter. What are you going to do? Thomas was staring out the window, his jaw tight. I don't know. Part of me wants to burn this and pretend it never came. Part of me... He stopped. The girls deserve to know their mother thinks about them, that she regrets what she did. But what if it hurts them more than it helps? What if opening this door just gives them new ways to be wounded? Clara moved to stand beside him. That's not your decision to make alone, Thomas. The girls are old enough to have a say. Maggie's 12, Sarah's 9, Lizzie's 6, Ruth is 4. They're children. They're children who've spent 2 years wondering why their mother left. Children who deserve to know she didn't forget them. Thomas turned to face her. If I show them this letter, everything changes. They'll have questions I can't answer. They'll want things I can't give them. Maybe? Clara reached for his hand. Or maybe they'll finally have some peace. Maybe knowing their mother still loves them even from far away will help them heal. And if Victoria wants to come back, if she wants to be part of their lives again, then you figure that out when it happens, one step at a time. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I need to think, he said finally. This is too big to decide right now. Take all the time you need. He nodded and walked out of the kitchen, the letter still clutched in his hand. Clara watched him go, her heart aching. Some battles couldn't be fought for someone else. Some decisions had to be made alone. But whatever Thomas chose, she would be there when he was done. He made his decision 3 days later. Clara was braiding Ruth's hair in the parlor when Thomas appeared in the doorway. Family meeting, he said quietly. All of us, right now. The girls gathered on the sofa, Maggie rigid with anticipation. Sarah wary, Lizzie nervous, Ruth oblivious. Clara sat beside them while Thomas stood before the fireplace, Victoria's letter in his hand. "I need to tell you something," he began. "Something important about your mother." Maggie's face hardened. "What about her?" "She wrote to me, to us." Thomas held up the envelope. "She heard about the custody hearing about your grandmother trying to take you away. She wanted me to know she was sorry, that she never stopped thinking about you." Silence fell over the room. "She's lying," Sarah said flatly. "If she cared about us, she wouldn't have left." "Maybe, or maybe it's more complicated than that." Thomas moved to sit in the chair across from them. "I'm not going to tell you what to think or feel about your mother. That's your choice to make. But I thought you deserved to know the truth, that she reached out, that she regrets what she did." "Does she want to come back?" Lizzie's voice was barely a whisper. "She didn't say. She said she knows she doesn't have the right to be part of your lives again, that she gave that up when she left." "Good," Maggie said sharply. "She's right." "Maggie." "No, Father, I don't want to hear her excuses. I don't care if she's sorry. Sorry doesn't fix 2 years of wondering what we did wrong. Sorry doesn't—" Her voice cracked. "Sorry doesn't make it stop hurting." Thomas reached for her hand. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Ruth tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Is my mama coming to visit?" Clara looked at Thomas. He nodded slightly, permission for her to answer. "We don't know yet, sweetheart. Your father wanted to tell you she wrote a letter, that's all. Nothing else is decided." "Oh." Ruth considered this. "Will she braid my hair like you do?" The question hit Clara like a blow. "I don't know, Ruth, but no matter what happens with your mama, I'm not going anywhere." "Okay. Promise." "I promise." Ruth nodded, satisfied, and went back to playing with the ribbons Clara had woven into her hair. But the older girls weren't so easily comforted. Sarah had retreated into silence, her arms wrapped around herself, her face a mask. Lizzie was crying quietly, tears sliding down her cheeks. And Maggie? Maggie looked like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. "I want to read it," Maggie said suddenly. "The letter. I want to see what she said." Thomas hesitated, then handed it over. Maggie read in silence, her expression giving nothing away. When she finished, she passed it to Sarah, who passed it to Lizzie. Ruth didn't ask to read it. She probably couldn't understand most of the words anyway. When the letter had made its rounds, Thomas took it back. "I'm not going to force any of you to respond. If you want to write to her, you can. If you want to pretend this letter never existed, that's fine too. But whatever you decide—" He looked at each of his daughters in turn. "You're not doing it alone. We're a family. We face things together." Maggie stood abruptly. "I need to think," she said, echoing her father's words from 3 days ago. She walked out of the room. One by one, the other girls followed Sarah to the barn, Lizzie to her room, Ruth to find Martha and whatever cookies might be available in the kitchen. Thomas and Clara sat alone in the sudden silence. "That could have gone worse," Clara said quietly. "It could have gone better. Give them time. This is a lot to process." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "I keep second-guessing myself. Maybe I shouldn't have told them. Maybe I should have—" "You did the right thing." Clara moved to sit beside him. "They deserve to know. What they do with that knowledge is up to them." "What if it breaks them?" "It won't. Those girls are stronger than you know." She took his hand. "And they have you. They have Martha. They have—" She hesitated. "They have me." Thomas turned to look at her. "Do they—" "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He stopped, started again. "Clara, I've been trying to find the right moment to ask you something. There never seems to be one. There's always another crisis, another battle, another reason to wait." Clara's heart began to pound. "Thomas, I'm done waiting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. This was my grandmother's. She wore it for 53 years. When she died, she left it to me with instructions to give it to the woman I loved." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple gold, beautiful in its lack of pretension. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks," Thomas said quietly, "waiting for the perfect moment. But there is no perfect moment, is there? There's just life. Messy, complicated, beautiful life." Thomas. Clara Mercer. He took her hand. "I have loved you since the day you stood on my porch in rags and refused to beg. I have loved you through trials and battles and the slow sacred work of becoming a family. I will love you for the rest of my life, however long that may be." He drew a breath. "Will you marry me?" Clara looked at the ring, at the hope and fear mingled in his eyes, at this man who had taken a chance on her when she had nothing. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady, even as tears streamed down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. And then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the world outside the parlor faded into nothing. When they finally pulled apart, Ruth was standing in the doorway. "Are you getting married?" she asked, her eyes wide. Clara laughed through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." "Does that mean you'll be my new mama?" Clara knelt down and pulled the little girl into her arms. "If you want me to be." Ruth considered this seriously. "I want that," she decided. "I want that a lot." One by one, the other girls drifted back. Lizzie heard the news and burst into fresh tears, happy ones this time. Sarah tried to look indifferent and failed spectacularly, a grin breaking through her carefully maintained scowl. And Maggie. Maggie stood in the doorway for a long moment watching. Then she crossed the room and hugged Clara fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying. For all of it." Clara held her tight. "Thank you for letting me." The wedding took place 6 weeks later. They held it in the meadow behind the main house where wildflowers were beginning to push through the spring grass. The guests were few, but dear ranch hands' neighbors, the minister from town, who had known Thomas since boyhood. Martha had outdone herself with the food. The girls had made flower crowns for their hair. And Thomas stood at the makeshift altar, looking like a man who couldn't quite believe his luck. Clara walked toward him on old Pete's arm, her borrowed dress simple and white, her heart so full it hurt. When she reached the altar, Thomas took her hands. "Ready," he whispered. "I've been ready since the day I knocked on your door." The ceremony was brief, heartfelt, perfect. The minister spoke of love and perseverance, and the mysterious ways that broken people find each other. The girls stood in a row beside their father, faces shining, and when the minister finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Thomas pulled Clara into his arms like he would never let go. The celebration lasted until sunset. There was dancing and laughter and more food than anyone could eat. Ruth fell asleep in Clara's lap. Sarah actually smiled without being prompted. Lizzie danced with her father, her fears forgotten for one golden evening. And Maggie found Clara alone by the refreshment table and handed her an envelope. "What's this?" "A letter to my mother." Maggie's voice was steady. "I want to tell her about the wedding. About everything. Will you make sure it gets to San Francisco?" Clara looked at the envelope in her hands. "Are you sure?" "No." Maggie almost smiled. "But you told me once that the only way to know if someone will stay is to give them the chance to prove it. Maybe that goes for mothers too." Clara pulled the girl into a hug. "I'll make sure it gets there." "Thank you." Maggie pulled back. "And Clara?" "Yes. I'm glad Father married you. I'm glad you're going to be—" She hesitated. "Part of our family, officially?" "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." That night, after the guests had gone and the girls were in bed, Clara and Thomas walked together to the small cemetery on the hill behind the house. 2 graves waited there, Mrs. Patterson's mother, who had worked at Clearwater Ranch 40 years before, and a baby Holloway who had died before Thomas was born. Clara knelt in the grass and bowed her head. I used to talk to Emma, she said quietly. After she died, I'd go to her grave and tell her about my day, about the people I met, the places I went. It made me feel like she was still with me somehow. Thomas knelt beside her. Do you still talk to her? Sometimes. Less often now. Clara looked up at the stars. I used to feel guilty about that, like moving on meant forgetting her. And now I know that's not true. Emma's part of me. She always will be. But she'd want me to be happy. She'd want me to live. Thomas took her hand. She'd be proud of you. I hope so. Clara leaned against his shoulder. I hope wherever she is, she knows her mama found her way home. They sat together in the darkness, two wounded people who had found each other against all odds. Behind them, Clearwater Ranch glowed with lamplight, a house full of children, full of hope, full of the messy, beautiful chaos of family. Thomas. Yes. Thank you for opening your door, for giving me a chance, for... She stopped. For everything. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Thank you for staying. I'll always stay. Promise. Clara smiled. I promise. The years that followed were not without challenges. Victoria wrote back to Maggie, and then to the other girls, and slowly, painfully, a fragile correspondence began. She never asked to visit, never pushed for more than they were willing to give. But she was there in letters and small gifts, a presence that was no longer absence. Constance Wellington made one more attempt at custody when Ruth was 7. She lost spectacularly. After that, even her lawyers stopped writing. The ranch prospered. Thomas learned to balance work with family, not perfectly, but well enough. The girls grew up strong and fierce and full of the confidence that comes from knowing you are loved. Maggie went east for school and came back with ideas about women's suffrage and property rights. Sarah married a rancher from 2 counties over who wasn't afraid of her temper. Lizzie became a teacher helping other frightened children find their courage. And Ruth stayed close to home, working alongside her father, eventually taking over the ranch when his hands grew too old for the work. Clara watched them all grow, marveling at the women they became. She had come to Clearwater Ranch with nothing, no hope, no future, no reason to keep breathing. She had been turned away from 19 doors before the 20th finally opened, and behind that door she had found everything. On their 20th anniversary, Thomas led Clara to the porch where they had first met. Remember this, Clara laughed. How could I forget? I was starving, freezing, and you were scowling at me like I'd insulted your mother. I was trying to figure out if you were real. Thomas pulled her close. This woman who'd walked 300 miles and still wouldn't beg, who looked at my daughters like they were puzzles worth solving instead of problems to be managed. They were never problems. No, they weren't. But nobody else saw that. Nobody except you. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. I used to wonder why I survived, she said softly. When Samuel died, when the children died, I used to lie awake asking what the point was, why I was still breathing when everyone I loved was gone. And now I know. She looked up at him. I survived so I could find you, so I could find them, so I could have this. Thomas kissed her soft, gentle, full of 20 years of love. I'm glad you knocked on my door, Clara Holloway. I'm glad you opened it, Thomas. They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, the ranch hummed with life, children's laughter, horses nickering, the endless, beautiful noise of a family going about its day. Clara had walked 300 miles to reach this place. She had knocked on 20 doors before one finally opened. She had lost everything, husband, children, hope, and found it all again in ways she never could have imagined. And now, standing on the porch where her new life had begun, Clara Mercer Holloway knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged. The woman who had begged for work in rags had become the heart of a family. The stranger at the gates had become a mother, a wife, a home. And the door that had opened to let her in would never ever close again.